Welcome, everybody. My name is Caroline Colas, and I am the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today at our Lunch and Learn, we are going to talk about after lockdown, moving beyond just surviving with Alan Brown. In this session, mindfulness educator Alan Brown is back to discuss how positive physical, social, and emotional well-being practices can come to our aid as our city and world begin to open up. There are still many unknown factors regarding COVID-19, and we might worry about the potential risky behavior of others, but we can become aware of our responses and listen to internal cues in order to manage our fear and take care of ourselves and begin to socialize safely with others. Learn how mindfulness can help you be more engaged, emotionally balanced, and foster connections with yourself and with your neighbors and your world. And just so you know, a little reminder about Alan, he's the founder of Learning to Thrive, a consulting firm that works with schools and school districts to create mindfulness and positive education programs. He blends a thorough understanding of the unique challenges facing students, parents, and teachers with a firm belief that all people can learn to thrive physically, mentally, emotionally, and I would say spiritually, I'm sure. He offers time-honored and evidence-based programs through organizational consulting, speaking, coaching, and teaching. And he has degrees in humanities from Johns Hopkins University, the University of Chicago, as well as advanced certification in mindfulness and education, positive psychology, mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and Vinyasa Yoga. Alan, welcome to the call.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry you had to read all that. That's so long. You should trim it down next time. Well.
Can you lead us in a little mindful moment?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Sure. I'm actually, if it's all right, I'll offer two brief practices. Both of them are hand related because this is kind of always at the ready for us, and they're both quick, and I like to offer some choice for folks. So the first practice is a practice I call Take 5, and you can just take whichever hand. You don't have to hold it up. I'm holding it up so you can see it. It can be in your lap or wherever you want, or you can show everyone your hand, but this is just so you see mine on camera. And then you're going to take the opposite pointer finger, and we're going to place the pointer finger in the palm of the open hand. And then I'll show you first, and then we can do it together. As you inhale, we'll trace up the pinky. And then as you exhale, we'll trace down the pinky. And then as we inhale, we'll move up the fourth finger, exhale and down, and so on and so forth. So each inhale is tracing up the next finger, and each exhale we trace down. And then when we get over to the thumb, we'll just flip, and we'll move over to the other hand and repeat that again. So it'll be a total of 10 breaths that we take together, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm seeing some head nods, great. So you're welcome to open your eyes, you're welcome to close your eyes, you're welcome to sort of look into your palm at your finger as you do this. And as we begin, just on your next breath, just inhaling and tracing up, and exhaling and tracing down. Inhaling up and exhaling down. Continuing with the rhythm of your own breath, so it doesn't have to be special, doesn't have to be slow or fast. Just noticing the inhale and the exhale, maybe the sensation of finger on palm. Switching over to the other hand whenever it is that you get there in your own rhythm. And then whenever it is that you have finished all 10 fingers, you can just gently bring your hands to rest in your lap or wherever feels comfortable. And just notice what you feel like now. Again, maybe you still notice the palms. Maybe you notice the breath. Or anything else that you become aware of. And then if the eyes are closed, can just gently open them and sort of reorient to the screen. And then I'll just offer a quick second practice for you. And this involves both hands at the same time. Again, I'll just show you up here. You're welcome to have them lower wherever feels comfortable for you, but you can just gently bring the hands together to touch and notice sensation. So in mindfulness, we're bringing our awareness to what's happening in the present moment, and often sensations are one of the ways we access that. So see if you can just notice the sensation of one hand pressing against the other. It doesn't have to be a heavy sensation, but you can give it as much pressure as helps you become aware of the sensations. And then maybe notice the place where your pinky fingers touch. If you want to give a little extra pressure there to sense, that's fine. You don't have to. Noticing the place that the fourth fingers touch. Middle fingers. Index fingers. And the thumbs. And maybe just expanding awareness back out to the whole palm, any points of contact. And when you're ready, you can just let the hands open and relax down into your lap. Thanks, everyone.
Wow. What I noticed about those is I could do those anywhere, you know, in relationship to what we're going to talk about today, which is how do I go back out into the world, right? How do I do that? And how do I navigate the new world? It's different. I noticed that these hand techniques that you just gave us, or using the hand along with the breath, I was thinking, gosh, I could do that when I'm sitting in the park, or I could do that when I'm feeling anxious. And no one would even really know it, right?
Right.
And
right.
I would love to start with this idea. Yeah. I'd love to start with this idea of how do you use mindfulness to do just that, to center yourself in situations?
It's interesting because I feel like I need to make a caveat first, which is that sometimes we don't feel great. And when we approach mindfulness as the thing that's supposed to make us feel better, this isn't your question, but it's like the important precursor. If I approach mindfulness as a thing that's supposed to make me feel better, and then I do this, and then I don't feel better, that I've somehow done it wrong, or that mindfulness doesn't work. And mindfulness is present moment awareness. It's a kind, non-judgmental awareness of what's happening right now. And what's happening right now may be anxiety or any other number of things that are unpleasant. And so if that's my experience, it may be true that after doing 10 breaths or noticing my palms or noticing something else, I still notice anxiety. It doesn't go away. And the mindfulness may not do that. But what it allows us is a capacity to notice a both and. That I may feel anxious, and I may also feel something that's more neutral. Or I may also feel something that's even soothing. Now, for some people, things like taking a couple of breaths can feel very soothing. Not always, and you're not doing it wrong if that's not true for you. Like you're anxious and you notice that your breathing feels tight. Well, that makes you feel more anxious. That's not wrong, but it's a personal exploration. What can I notice? So I would almost frame it as a question. What can I notice in this moment that despite feeling this way, what I feel as challenge, something else is also present that feels either neutral or that feels even nice. Physical sensations for me, so the breath for me usually does feel nice, but that's just me. Also sounds often feel very neutral. So I notice that if I'm having a particularly frustrating time or a challenging emotion, coming outside of my body into the environment that is around me, in particular, I'll go on a walk and listen. The roads here are gravel. So I hear the gravel underneath my feet. And that's actually a really comforting, it's kind of a boring sound, right? But it's not what's happening up here. It's not all the what's happening in here. And that's not to ignore what's happening in my body. Again, we're not trying to push it away. It's allowing for both things to be true. Right now, this is really challenging. And right now, that sounds nice. Or right now, there are also birds chirping. Today, there's rain, and I'm listening to the rain on the leaves. It's actually a very neutral sound, but that helps me to be present to something else as well. So I don't get kind of lost, because the overwhelm of anxiety and, you know, this moment is easy. There are a lot of things that may feel overwhelming. So finding something that takes us out of that so we can have a respite, not pushing it away, but a respite from, so we can feel resourced to return to it.
Beautiful. You know, your last session when you were with us before really was about overwhelm, right? It was about overwhelm. And now we're talking about, okay, we've gotten through this. We've been dealing with COVID-19 for quite some time. And now there's this re-entry. That can be overwhelming too, or anxiety inducing. But talk to me a little bit about this multitude of feelings and why we spend so much time not wanting to feel.
It's hard. It's not fun. It's not pleasant, right? Like, and I think it's one of the things in mindfulness that is asked most often when, you know, in sort of the standard arc of a mindfulness class. It's about midway through that we introduce this notion of, and we can also turn towards discomfort. We're going to do these practices of attention to help us stabilize our attention and learn that we could stay with any object of attention, sometimes an unpleasant object. And then we do. It's like, oh, I don't like this. This doesn't feel good. And we live in a culture that by and large glorifies our ability to not have to feel, or certainly to not have to feel bad. There's always a way to distract ourselves, whether that is with a material possession, whether it's with an entertainment option, or something else that's just kind of always there for us. That's lovely until it's unavoidable, the thing that is uncomfortable. And I think that's in part the bigness of this moment, is that it is really all encompassing. You were talking before we started about, you know, going to the hair salon, or, you know, things that are, or groceries, right? We go to these daily tasks, and those are tasks that now also we have to be aware of our environment, and we have to be aware of this potential threat, or, you know, kind of any of these things, because it's all still out there. Yeah, I'm noticing something in the chat that we haven't gotten through this exactly, right? That we were re-entering the world, even from just our very initial phases of, we're going to stay at home all of the time, or most of the time. Well, now it's, some people are being called back to work. Some people have been working all of the time, right? Straight through all of this. But as more and more people are coming out into more and more areas of kind of the public sphere, how does that work for us? And so we can turn towards what is difficult. We can hold that as an object of our attention that doesn't have to take us away. But for most of us, that's new, right? It's something that we haven't really practiced. When we talk about mindfulness practice, well, the practice allows us to get more, I don't like to use the word skilled, but we get more experience with what happens for me when I turn towards something that's uncomfortable. It's kind of why we do it first at home or in the practice setting. Maybe I'll just think about this thing that might be hard. What happens in my mind? What happens in my body? Can I tolerate what happens in my mind? Can I tolerate what's happening in my body? And that's ultimately what we're cultivating, is kind of the tolerance of being with what's difficult.
So in your last session, you talked about the importance of distraction and sort of moving towards pleasure and away from pain. And can you tie that in here? Because I want to build up my tolerance, but I also, in positive psychology, we talk about using distraction as a tool too, to help us. are you saying that in a way that's how we can use moving towards pleasure to help us build our tolerance, or just clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So we have on one hand a very natural aversion towards discomfort and the negativity bias of the mind that often pulls us to maybe what's not working. And so it's easy to spend, for the mind to be pulled to, all of the scenarios of kind of future challenge, or to ruminate on all of the past challenges and assume that the future will be like those. So on one hand, we have this opportunity to turn towards what is pleasant as a resource. I don't have to dwell always, especially if those thoughts or experiences are automatic. I don't have to stay there for the whole time of my waking existence from morning till night. If it feels like it's just sort of this constant waterfall of thoughts or of fears or of worries, or, whatever, or the planning, or any of those things that the automatic mind, that the sort of naturally running mind brings us to. Similarly, the body has those same responses, especially if where my mind goes is to the uncomfortable thoughts, is to the anxieties of something that's maybe not happening right now. And so let's say the fear is the fear of contact with others as I'm going out. Maybe I have been in and I have to transition more to being out or in more public settings. I'm just thinking about how to maybe do that. Well, in this moment, I'm not outside. In this moment, I'm in a room by myself and I'm safe. But I can notice what happens at even the thought, because that thought has a reverberation in my body. Where do I feel that? I notice that my chest gets tight. I notice I get a little bit of short of breath. I notice I get butterflies in my stomach. Whatever, and we all have our bodies respond in their own ways, but it's within this range of normal fight or flight response. The body activates, preparing for threat. So I can start to notice what my body does, and then I can reorient. Actually, right now, none of those things are happening. So my body is mobilizing for a threat that's not present. Doesn't mean it's not a threat in general. It doesn't mean that when I go out, I don't have to be vigilant. I do. And it doesn't mean that when I go out, maybe I feel disconnected or challenged because everyone's in a mask and it's really hard to just read other people's expressions. So it's hard to co-regulate to other people. All of those things are real. It's just, is that challenge happening right now? So again, that's the notion of how I practice and can use, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, not even when I'm outside, but maybe just thinking about it, what are my resources? I have other things that I can also notice so that I can practice. And this is what it feels like to feel okay in my body. This is what it feels like when the body registers safety. And I don't want to say when I am safe, right? Like it's a very relative and complex concept, but when the body registers safely, it feels different and it behaves differently.
It's almost like what you're saying is a dress rehearsal.
Right.
Right. And I wonder, and I wonder if we could do a dress rehearsal if you're up for it, right? Like right now with everyone, we could actually imagine something like that, and take everybody through that, and we could put it in the chat like, okay, what are you, as you're sitting here on our call today, and as you're thinking about reentry, imagining a scenario that maybe does make you feel a little uncomfortable. And then Alan, if you could take us with that, through that, and then we can talk about, maybe even ask the question in the chat, what are some of the scenarios that you all are thinking about right now that are potentially making you feel anxious or nervous about, going back outside, for example.
Yeah, so please go ahead and type those. And what I'll offer too is, if we're doing this as a rehearsal, maybe don't pick the one that is the highest level of anxiety or the highest level of challenge. If there's a mid or lower level challenge, that's great to start with, because again, we're building a capacity. So we don't want to start on level 10. Let's start the video game at level 1.
That's super important, isn't it?
Yeah.
We tend to be, as New Yorkers, like overachievers. I'm going to go for the one that's making
me for the most extreme,
and the one that's worrying me the most. But actually, that's part of the practice too. It's like baby steps. It's like we're little happy embryos, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's see, taking the subway, being around people who aren't wearing masks. Okay, great. This is great, everybody. Hairdresser, eating in a restaurant. I'm fearful of angry non-mask wearer who, going to my brother's house. I'm fearful and angry of non-mask wearer who I cannot cross the street from. Yeah, that's an interesting situation. Getting out of town, going to dinner, going to yoga class again, which I miss so much. So does everybody have a scenario in their head? Again, low level one, not the we're not talking about going to the movies yet. Or maybe that's a low level for someone. It's individual, isn't it? We were talking about that earlier on the call, where trauma is actually, Kathy Washburn and Phoebe Atkinson's also said this, and people have reinforced this on our calls, that trauma is really individual to a person. So what could be traumatic for me, based on my history, might not be traumatic for you, and vice versa. Yeah. So are you reading some other?
I'm reading them, and I just want to flag, because now that we're getting some things, there's earlier in the comments, please address, and I would love to come back to this, address those who are immune compromised or highly vulnerable, and the difference in sort of discernment of just discomfort versus, actual risk to not going outside, and how do we sort of know where that line is. Love to come back to that after this. Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful.
So it seems like we have some scenarios here. And for the purposes of this exercise, and generally all exercises, I would say the first question for yourself is, as you try to imagine it, will it feel safe to close your eyes and imagine it? Or is that too immersed in the sensory experience? And if it's too immersed, you can just kind of soften your gaze, or find a place around the room that even feels maybe pleasant to rest your gaze and look at, so that you always have your eyes open to what's happening here and now. And know that if you make the choice to close your eyes, you can also always open them at any time, because we're just practicing, and where you are is here and now. And so notice that space. You can feel the ground underneath your feet, or the chair underneath your legs, your back, your hips. And just really have a clear sense of where you are now as compared to this thing that you're going to imagine. And then as you're ready, if you're ready, just begin to imagine. You can do it with as much sensory detail as feels comfortable. And maybe we should think of this exercise as comfort plus 1. So it's not comfort plus 10, but it's the comfort plus 1. Just start to notice in your scenario, where does it start to be uncomfortable? And in your body, how do you know that that starts to be uncomfortable? Where does that discomfort start to register? And whenever you feel just enough that you notice that you are registering discomfort, see if you can find somewhere in the body that feels either neutral or even pleasant. So maybe for you, that's the breathing in and out. It might be your feet on the floor, your hands kind of making contact with your lap. Just noticing that. Or again, noticing the external environment, that here where you are in the room, noticing shapes or colors or anything about the room that stands out to you. And then for maybe just a minute or so, how about just toggling back and forth? We're only toggling back and forth between the comfort plus 1. If comfort plus 1 starts to feel just like comfort, you can sort of imagine what comfort plus 2 would be, because that now becomes your comfort plus 1. And then coming back to the body or to the space around you, just noticing, here I'm not experiencing this thing I'm imagining. Right now, I'm just sitting in this room, just on this webinar, just with my computer. And here my body can register some sense of safety. And then when you're ready, you can stay with it a little longer if it feels right, or if it feels like that was just enough. You can actually just open the eyes and come out of that. And if you need to be more deliberate about kind of ending, punctuating that experience, maybe a deeper breath or a little bit of movement, a stretch, a twist, just we're no longer doing that exercise in the mind, we're doing this with the body.
That sense of safety is really a key, isn't it? It's a cornerstone of this practice, isn't it?
It is a cornerstone of practice, and I really want to acknowledge what I appreciate. There's even a comment about this already before I asked. I imagine that for some folks, even just the thought just doesn't feel safe, and that's okay. So we're not trying to strong arm the mind into a place where it's not yet, in particular, because obviously this isn't a one-size-fits-all experience. Everyone has a very unique situation. That is their unique personal situation, the family and self-isolation or quarantine situation, their medical situation, their economics. There are so many things that are contributing in this moment. So I don't want to minimize any sense of, this is too much. And if this is too much, really staying with the sense of, can you find one thing that is neutral feeling? It's probably not those thoughts, and it's probably not imagining those scenarios if they're really genuinely overwhelming. It might just be, again, we go back to sort of this exercise, right? It might just be the way my pinky fingers touch each other. And can I take just for a few moments, what does that feel like? It's not escapist. That's actually helping the body orient to, okay, well, this doesn't feel like there's danger here. And this doesn't feel like there's danger here. This doesn't feel like, here are all sorts of things I can notice that don't feel that sense of threat. Okay, I have these also. So this and.
It reminds me of what Kathy Washburn was talking about. She works a lot. She's recovered from cancer and works a lot with people living with cancer. And she talks about this 1 hot minute. For 1 hot minute, can I focus in my body on what is working today? Meaning my eyes can open and shut.
Mm-hmm.
I can breathe in and out.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel my hands. And she said that has been really helpful for her to just focus on all of the things, especially when she was working with pain. And I know you're an MBSR teacher, and pain is such a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to ride with that wave. I wonder if there's something similar about the danger and the situation we're in, riding that like riding pain. Do you know what I mean? In the MBSR model.
Sure. It's all just discomfort, right? And when I say just discomfort, that is not meant in a dismissive way, but those are all genres of the same experience that we have. They're varying degrees of a kind of discomfort. Some of the discomfort comes in the form of thoughts, uncomfortable thoughts for us. Sometimes discomfort comes in uncomfortable emotions, and sometimes in uncomfortable or unpleasant sensations in the body. But the way we react to any of them and work with any of them are the same. And so I also want to be kind of clear, the examples many people were giving were about going out, but again, maybe that's not the right choice, or maybe the discomfort is staying in, or maybe it could come from any kind of direction or any part of our experience. That's also not something we need to minimize. I'm seeing a couple times in the chat various versions of how do I work with these fears. It's a fear of this, it's a fear of that, and even just the thinking of it is actually maybe the most challenging part. So one of the reasons we often go to the body is because it helps provide the respite from the mind. That is not always true. Sometimes the volume on the mind is just really loud. I would say if you are in any way able to find a place in the body, and sometimes being still in the body is not helpful, so the next suggestion I would make is actually movement rather than trying to just like turn and face my thoughts head on, as it were. Sometimes something like, I think last time we did some tapping, or any practices that like, I'm just gonna actually, there's some actual sensation here so that I'm giving myself the sensory experience. Rubbing the hands will start to, probably making it loud on Zoom, but if you're rubbing your hands, and then there's a certain tingle that you start to feel in your hands. Sometimes these are ways of sort of generating a feeling to find, but it's absolutely true that sensation may not be helpful. The next, as I mentioned, finding places around me, the other senses, seeing what I'm hearing. But it is absolutely true that it's also okay to sort of need to work with thoughts. And I'm seeing some questions to the question, like, how do I work with them? Or how do I even know when to work with them, if it's okay to work with them? Generally speaking, if the body feels so activated, we are probably not able to work rationally with thoughts. Because that signals that the executive functioning is probably offline. And if we're having a pretty major fight or flight experience, we want to let that wave crest with movement, with stillness, with whatever sort of is going to work for you. For some people, that's music. It might be a television show. It might, it just really might be, I just need to do something else entirely, depending on the level of overwhelm. All of those things are fine. And when we come back from, when we've sort of crested that wave, is the better moment to evaluate, to what extent is this fear helpful, rational? It may be completely rational. It may, based on your situation, I shouldn't go out, or I can go out, and then we can determine that. But it's really, am I in a space where I can evaluate this rationally? Sometimes I can't do it by myself. I actually need someone else's help. Can I bounce this off of you? Can I talk through this? Other people co-regulating, we work with other people's nervous systems too, and having someone that maybe doesn't feel as triggered by whatever that situation is, or can feel more neutral to that situation, can provide a more helpful sounding board for the rational thought. Let them be your executive function.
Let's unpack this a little bit more specifically, because you've been saying some really important things. One of the things that you've been talking about is discomfort, and not only discomfort on the physical level, but the emotional level and the, mental level. That it seems to me, again, if we go back to our MBSR and we're building what you said previously about tolerance, and you also made some references to surfing, not I'm calling it surfing, but riding the wave. It seems to me like, can we go back to kind of the beginning and say, okay, wait a second, our structure of our nervous system, are we in essence like conductors, where we're using some of these practices to conduct this part of the symphony, that part of the symphony, that part, and one part meaning, our mental capacities, our physical capacities, our emotional capacities, where we're actually, in a way, listening to the music of our own system, and then sort of finding the neutral so we can be in the center of it, and then making choices, right?
Yeah, that conductor, some people will refer to it, especially in meditation, as the observer sometimes. Like, who is the observer online or offline? I have a colleague who, I don't remember if we talked about this the last time or not, but talks about it as a horse and the rider. And that when the fight or flight system really kind of picks up or is activated strongly, it's like the horse is bucking and the rider has a hard time steering, or the rider has a hard time kind of being in control. And even she calls it rider off the horse. Like when the body or the autopilot of the mind are just so activated in kind of a danger mode, rightly, or sometimes, not necessarily I don't want to say not rightly, rightly or in a way that does not actually meet the current circumstances. And so if I'm having a fear response right now about going out, but I'm not out, my physical situation of arousal is not necessarily meeting my current circumstances, where actually I'm just in a room with some plants and a light and, but my body doesn't know that. My body registers the thought as the same thing as the situation itself. And so I become activated. And in that moment, the rider falls off the horse when the body is in its automatic response to a threat. Once we crest that wave, once that wave has crested, and eventually it does, when the body resettles, that's what I mean sort of by finding that sense of safety registering in the body. It's not an indefinite, it's not usually an indefinite experience. That is when the rider can get back on the horse, when the conductor can sort of take the podium again, as it were. Because at that point, I have the capacity to see or feel what's even happening in my body. Right? Like when I lose that awareness entirely, thus the rider's off the horse. But it's a very deep conditioning. It's part of our genetic makeup. It's just how the human body works. And it's why it's important to sort of have that sense of what is happening in my body, which we don't always have. And many of us have lived a lot of years not necessarily cultivating that sense.
That's beautiful. And I was just thinking of like kids, who you work a lot with, kids, and even the young ones. It's like they'll have this temper tantrum, right? So the rider is off the horse, for sure.
Right. Anger is another one, right?
Right, and then they calm down, right? And it's the great thing about oftentimes with kids is they're on to the next thing. It's like they kind of process and ride those waves quickly. And it seems like sometimes is that because they allow that to happen? Do they move through it? Are you sort of saying that in mindfulness, what we can do is we can be that neutral observer and we can see get triggered and ride that, be with ourselves so that we can get back on that horse quicker. It's not to prevent ever getting bucked off the horse. That's not even possible, right?
That's not possible. That's not possible. Exactly. We're not, there's sometimes the misconception, especially among meditation teachers. I always find myself, or as I first started to teach this stuff, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm the mindfulness teacher. I shouldn't this, I should, and that's not real. I'm a human, actually, is what I am, I've learned. Unfortunately, none of these situations necessarily go away. It is the ability to recognize that this discomfort is temporary. And I just want to keep caveating here because I don't want to give the impression that the circumstances, which are extreme in this moment, right? Like these are more extreme circumstances than what we have ever lived through, most of us. And so it is true that it may feel like, oh, well, just how temporary, that feels casual or callous to say, well, it's just temporary, but there are lots of ways to think about it's just temporary. You could think about it's just temporary as well, we don't know when we'll get a vaccine. We will get a vaccine, one hopes, eventually, but it might be some years. So this is a long, that's the marathon, but it's still there's a finish line to that marathon. We don't know when it is. There's the temporary of, I'm going to be uncomfortable when I go out to go get groceries, but eventually I'll be back home. Or maybe that starts to be, I'm going to be uncomfortable when I first see people, but I'll be okay. There are sort of these differing degrees of temporary. Again, not dismissing actual medical needs, and that's a separate, are my basic safety needs met? Am I actually safe, and maybe I should say in this case, safe enough, right? That I can then be with what comes up.
Beautiful. Let's just check in with the chat for a second.
Yes.
To see what we're getting in there.
I see, just as I see something as just temporary, the next thing hits and the body doesn't have a chance to recover. Right. Yeah. And then actually the sort of graph looks more like this rather than the rise. and the fall and the crest. I think when and it's one of the things that's been the hardest about this particular situation, is it seems that there are, in fact, lots of different challenges coming from lots of different angles. And some of this is, knowing maybe I won't get to just fully reset. It's wonderful when I can. That's why I like the mini practices of respite. If you can find what for you is this is pleasant enough for me. Sometimes like my go-to, and when I really can't otherwise find pleasant or respite, for me, it's a warm shower. I really it's not warm, it's actually a hot shower. Like really like hot water. I feel the sensation of the heat. I notice how different it feels to breathe the steam, like some of those things. And and it's not long. I would like it to be longer, but but it's never all that long. But finding the short respite, and when that respite is there, really making sure that I am staying with that respite. Really making, for this time, this is where I'm going to be. Like my mind still wants to be in all the other places, but I'm just going to be here for this short period of time. You and I also, Carolyn, the last time we were talking earlier this week, about some of the cognitive practices like gratitude. And it's the other part of this that, the body-based approach none of it's a one size fits all. And that really either celebrating or taking some deliberate cognitive time to notice something that feels like it's working or is not horrible. Like I'll actually, like, if what we're feeling is overwhelm, gratitude might feel like a reach. So this wasn't horrible today. Fill in the blank, whatever that was, right? And I don't mean to be snide. Like something that's not horrible feels maybe more approachable as a thing to be able to name.
Let's do it. In the chat, what is something that is not horrible, or what is something that is working? And then what we want you to do, everybody, right, is we want to just see, okay, we've been paying attention to our state, and then we've actually taken ourselves through an imagination of what it's going to be like to do something that we're uncomfortable with. And now what we're doing is we're consciously saying, okay, we're changing our state again. We're going to say, wait a second, what's working or what is not horrible? So everyone, we're actually doing the practices that we're talking about so that you can see in your body and register in your body, your mind, your emotions, whatever you're aware of, your nervous system, you see how it's shifting or changing. Because that's the other thing, isn't it, Alan? Shift happens. We don't stay the same. This isn't a constant. And that's one of the things that we can rely on. Mm-hmm. What are you noticing in the chat? I know you're reading that.
Yeah. It's seeming like there's a thread that I'm having, it's come in and out. So I'm only seeing parts of it about those of us who are staying at home. But I'm not quite sure I'm finding.
It says you're ignoring our request for support for those that are alone and must be at home.
Yeah. Let me just take a moment. I would love to hear, if it's okay, and I apologize if you've added this in the chat above. It's just there's a lot of it so I'm not able to read it all as it goes. Is that a request about the discomfort that arises from connection and feeling disconnected from people? Is that talking about discomfort, and that the examples we've been using have been discomfort outside the home, and the discomfort of imagining going outside the home feels overwhelming? It would just be really helpful. Thank you so much for helping me to understand your experience better. And again, I apologize if it was up above in the chat and I've not been able to read it all.
And while we're waiting for that, let's just see if people are writing in, no, we are home due to risk and home alone, and we need ongoing support to deal with this reality.
Mm-hmm.
The discomfort, there are guided meditations online at low or no cost with Tara Brach, John Kabat-Zinn, and Jack Kornfield, 3 mindfulness masters, but it would have to be it would be great to have a daily MBSR program. So it just sounds like people want more too. Is it possible to hold the negative and the positive at the same time? That's a great question. Linda wanted to know.
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge also, so it seems like the question, if I'm understanding it, and also, yeah, if someone, I'm happy to have an out loud conversation too. If it's a request for programming, that we can certainly, or that's not mine.
We can talk about that.
Right, programming is one thing, and I see something about guided meditations versus unguided meditation, or sort of more deliberate support of, I'm not able to connect with others. And then this question of the positive. Guided meditation, the point of the apps, there's a lot of guidance, and almost I've seen very few apps that whose guidance I wouldn't endorse. Actually, I'm not familiar with it. I haven't really seen an app that I wouldn't endorse. And sometimes there's the question of, I feel like I can't do this on my own. Like, is that a less than kind of practice? What is it like to seek the support of, I need someone telling me kind of what to do. Like it's too much for me to just try this on my own. And again, to sort of the point of the rider off the horse, if the experience you're feeling is one of like overwhelm or just sort of like the constant unsettled state, then as I was mentioning before, the working with, talking with, and in this situation now it's over Zoom or it's through recordings, but having another person's voice, whether they're live, whether they're recorded, is absolutely a wonderful support. And so it's a really helpful and important support, I would even say. Yeah.
And I would also add to that I don't mean to sound like, I've got it all together or something like that. For example, yesterday, I'm pretty much in my house. I have to say that. And yesterday I went out to the drugstore. I had to pick up a prescription. And that was the scenario that I was imagining when I was in the drugstore, right? Mm-hmm. And the distance that I felt. And I was trying to imagine in my head that comfort of, would I be comfortable again, just going into a store, right? And I acknowledged, because I'm not yet. So that's just where I am. I'm pretty much comfortable in my routine. But when I think about getting out of my routine, and maybe that's whether I'm inside or outside, I have a routine now that's keeping me safe. And perhaps people can relate to that. And now what I'm thinking about is, do I have to change that routine, right? As more time goes on? And the answer is, yeah, I'm going to, in order to, if I have to go and see a doctor, if I have to get a prescription, and then how can I manage that, that reality, right? Or even if it's somebody coming to my door, right? Do I let them in my house? How do I feel about that? Do I let them in my apartment? Even if it's somebody I love, going to a family gathering, what am I going to do for that? And building up that tolerance. So I hope, is that more of what you guys are thinking about? Is that hit more of the target? So if I'm homebound, one of the things that I would be concerned about is, what happens when someone comes to my door? Can I say hello to them? Can I open the door now? Or do they still have to let the stuff right at my door and then I have to come in as a way of building tolerance?
So I'm seeing one request for support here, which maybe is outside the scope of this call, but the support of interacting with others and sharing guided meditation is helpful. Something like, so it sounds kind of a programming request, if I'm seeing it right. As far as the question of, kind of changing our routines or altering our routines, that is not unique to this situation, to the pandemic, but certainly amplified in the pandemic. As we as human beings, routine can often register as safety because I know what to anticipate. So when I know or feel like I can reasonably anticipate what is coming, I know that I can also reasonably evaluate the risk, including a high risk situation, but a situation I might wish to avoid. So what you're kind of talking about, I mean, I think about it with schools. Every school that I'm working with is doing mental gymnastics to try to imagine all of the different scenarios that might be, and how do we plan for them. But the variables are great. They're many. And in that case, you know, I think one of the questions we can ask, none of these things are foolproof, of course, but one of the questions we can ask are, what are the routines I can hold to when I can't necessarily hold to others, or when I can't predict them? Something that we've been doing here is we've been doing a meal plan. Every week, we go to the supermarket only once, and on Sundays, we plan the meals for the week. And we have a little dry erase board and we make them. And there was a week when we didn't do it. We had stuff going on and we had leftovers. And so we just actually didn't get to the meal board. And I noticed that on Monday, I was really irritable and I was feeling unsettled. And I realized, I was like, you guys, we actually need to do, this might sound silly, but we need to do the meal plan. That board is empty and it's like, I hadn't realized how much certainty I was deriving from this thing that was predictable. And again, there are going to be a lot of things which are unpredictable, that we should anticipate that will remain true for some time. And because that is true, okay, what can I do? What are the routines that are within my control? How do I make some things, however small, it's okay that they're really small, but how do I make those things predictable?
Wow, that's really helpful, I think, Alan. And also, when we're talking about schools, we also were talking about this shift from the individual to the collective, right? That you and I were seeing about people. And maybe this is, Barbara, some of the things that you're talking about is that people seem to be talking about more about themselves than, wait a second, I'm staying in place or I'm putting my mask on for the collective good as well. Have we stopped? Have we lost touch with that? Because it has to be both, doesn't it? It has to work for me and it also has to work for this situation. We're being asked to do something that we just haven't been asked to do before, which is that our daily actions affect and impact other people. And I wonder if you can talk about that. And it seems like people's stress response or tolerance for that is very, very different. We have people that are saying, forget it, I'm not wearing a mask. We have people that are wearing a mask. But it's really the question of, can I also take into consideration what I need as well as what everyone else needs to stay safe in this moment?
Yeah.
And we're seeing that play out in many different ways. Sometimes irresponsibly and sometimes very responsibly.
Right.
As time goes on.
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, to sort of stay with this theme of certainty and uncertainty, you know, we see data that are kind of all over the place and or hard to come by. So we start with this ground of what does it even mean to be safe right now? What are actual safe practices? And everyone's tolerance for that uncertainty is going to be at a different level. And that's our baseline. We're starting from inconclusive or difficult to what are the recommendations? What do you recommend? Again, to go back to my own context, what are the recommendations for a school? Is this actually, at what level is this safe? Can we really reopen? Whose metric is the one that allows it? So and so we'll all have that different baseline. And then we go out into this collective, because we are in fact quite interconnected in this world, whether we are staying fully at home, whether we are spending more time out, whether we are actually out working. So how are we making these decisions for ourselves? One of the mindfulness practices that I go back to a lot in this time, and it's been really painful to watch how fractured this conversation is, certainly in the American context, which is the one that I can really speak to. But to wear a mask, to not wear a mask, to reopen, to not reopen, all those, right? This has become a very divisive issue rather than a collective and unifying issue. I go back to this notion that we all do deal differently with uncertainty, but there's a practice, there are sort of two companion practices. One is a practice that's known as loving kindness or heartfulness. Another is a practice called Just Like Me. And for me, that's a perspective taking exercise, really imagining that for any other person, just like me, this is a person who feels pain and suffering. This is a person just like me who is someone's child. This is a person just like me who wishes to see and be seen. The list can be quite extensive. And for me in this moment, this is a person who feels and registers fear in some way. I don't know what that way is, but I know the universal feeling of fear, of anxiety. And I might disagree strongly about how we can or should respond in our public behavior, what choices that should lead me to in terms of how we take care of our collective. But if I can come back again and again to this notion of what might this person need right now? What is a need that this person might have? And know that those needs are universal, that those needs are needs that we share, even as we express them or seek them very differently. That has been helpful for me to at least be less overwhelmed by just how divisive this moment sort of feels, and be less, let that be less of a piece of the challenge right now. Not none, it's not, it doesn't neutralize it, but that's how I sort of try to meet it.
Beautiful. And can you comment one last thing as we sum this up, on the need that we have as social creatures to be connected, and how we were talking about even with the kids in the schools. If you come back, it's not the building, right? That is the unifier, it's the actual connection. And so on the one hand, we have this situation where we really do need to connect. We really do need to touch. We really do, as humans, that's part of what makes us stabilizes. And that's a human need too. And you balance that with being safe. And that's, I think you were mentioning, one of the greatest challenge of educators right now and people, right? As we think about going out there, how can I balance my need for my own personal safety with also my need for human touch and interaction too?
Yeah. Well, it's very real, and it's very clear here in sort of the ongoing dialogue, right? This desire for connection, and I hope that can be something that is supported. I would say this: however imperfect, the mind is a very powerful simulator, like a very, very powerful simulator. And the ability to find both distress, but also comfort through what we are able to remember, recall, and imagine is pretty significant. So like extreme anxiety is imagined future danger, generally speaking. I don't mean that the imagination is necessarily wrong. It might be based on very real factual conditions, and I imagine that if this were to happen, it would be very bad. But it's often it's an action of the mind in the future. And similarly, the action of the mind of remembering the time when I was with the person I treasure, including people who may or may not be alive even, that those are powerful, as is this virtual connection that we have. All imperfect. I'm going to be super clear, and like, I'm not suggesting let's just do this forever, and I want to acknowledge that it's also painful to know what it's like to just gather in large groups and to, that memory, and to not have that, but to honor the desire for this connection, and that whatever way we can find it for ourselves, including memory lane, those can be very supportive practices. Again, also noting when they don't feel supportive, like, everyone's different and none of these practices is a one size fits all. So when they are generating more overwhelm or not feeling supportive, not having to like white knuckle through it, but it's a menu, it's kind of like the buffet of options, and really trying the things. And when we find the things that feel even a little bit less bad, again, right? Like, what's not bad right now? Well, that's moving us in a direction that is supportive. That's what that can tell us. And so we just keep working towards that. It's like planting seeds, it's watering seeds, it's letting the little plant grow over time, because these are new habits that we're building for a new reality.
One of the most favorite things I have, and people, everyone, just so you know, that we have been reading the chat, and I do hear you, Jennifer and Barbara, and a lot of people that are saying, we want more interaction. And some of that in the imperfect world is that Zoom has just updated the technology. And so in this moment, I'm actually not able to unmute everybody the way I would like to and have you interact. So just know that we're not doing this on purpose. We're learning as we go. We are a collective. We are a community. We are here. One of my routines is to be on these calls. Megan McDonough will be here on Monday. We'll be able to do more of that interactive. And next week, Megan and I are going to be doing a more interactive thing. So we're all on the same page. We're all longing for, in this moment, to connect, but also to be safe. Isn't that what I think is true? And we're at our time. Is there any closing practice or anything that you
yeah, sure.
leave us with?
Just wanting to settle my own horse and really be clear and offering something that might be of benefit based on our conversation. I think I'll offer that the just like me and the heartfulness or the kindness practices that we can practice towards others are also practices that we can do for ourselves and extend to ourselves. Compassion, kindness. And so for maybe just knowing that the time I'll offer the most abbreviated version of the loving kindness. So maybe you can just silently repeat to yourself, for yourself. And again, this is something that we offer to many other people or can offer to other people, but for yourself, may I be happy. May I be as healthy as I can be. May I be as free and safe from harm as is possible. And may I be at ease. And just offering that kind wish to yourself in exactly the same way you might wish it to the person you care most about, someone else in the world, knowing that you deserve it just as much.
And what I'd love everyone to do today, since I can't unmute you all, is just to rub your hands together and then just put your hands up. Put yourself on gallery view, right, if you can, and your camera on. And just put your hands out and just send each other a little loving touch right from where you are. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight we have Shavuot, and there's the Tikkun. We also have two happiness. Maria Serwa is back. Elijah Goldstein is going to be talking at midnight. Maria at 10. Next week we have Broadway's Best for Cancer Care. Anyone can go to that. That might answer some of these questions. We're going to be talking more about what are you doing when you're shut in and you can't go out, with those that are going through breast cancer, but it can be open to anyone. And I just wish you all an amazing, healthy weekend. And thank you, Alan, once again, for having a tough conversation. This is messy, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, there's no solutions. There's no, it's not the same for anyone. It's really where we are right now. It's a bit muddy and murky.
It is. I have a colleague who tells kids in the hallway, it's her constant refrain. She says, "You're doing great." And she says it no matter what to anyone. And it always lands softly and sweetly. So wherever you are, you're doing great.
Thanks, everybody. Take care now. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.